Geno Smith and DK Metcalf are both out of Seattle, while Sam Darnold takes Geno Smith's place, and the Steelers could be swapping quarterbacks with the Jets. We discussed the fantasy impact of all the biggest moves around the NFL in today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not doing this. I'm learning about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of the NBA. Listen, a lot of things have happened over the last 48 hours or so. But yeah, news is hitting us fast here on the first day of the legal tampering period of free agency. But even before that, we got Geno Smith and DK Metcalf both traded out of Seattle. Geno Smith goes to the Raiders. DK Metcalf goes to the Steelers. And then you're thinking, well, who's going to be the quarterback for the Seahawks? Well, that's now going to be Sam Darnold. We got news of that today. Got a big contract, 3 years, $100 million. And then Justin Fields leaves Pittsburgh. So we don't know who DK Metcalf's quarterback is going to be because they still don't have one yet. Justin Fields signs with the Jets. And it does sound like the Steelers are leaning towards being the heavy favorites to land Aaron Rodgers. So much to get through today. Let's start with the DK Metcalf traded news and all the Seahawks stuff here. So what do we think about DK Metcalf going to the Steelers? Does this upgrade his fantasy outlook, kind of stay the same, or downgrade it?
Well, it really depends, right? We got to find out who's going to be throwing the ball to him, and it has to be someone you assume that can throw downfield a little bit better than Justin Fields. When maybe the Fields fallout happened, and it was evident that he got a better deal to leave Pittsburgh, and he did. I mean, it was $20 million a season. I don't think the Steelers wanted to go that high after paying him basically peanuts last year. So when you look at this, you're saying, okay, they got two guys that are big, strong, can stretch the field. So I guess you need a strong arm. And the one strong arm guy that's out there now, after the Sam Darnold thing is over, well, there's two. They both are Achilles guys, Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers. I think one of those guys would seem to make the most sense here for the Steelers, only because they can push the ball downfield. I think Rodgers and his mobility, just a little bit, I know both these guys are coming off Achilles, but Rodgers has always been the better athlete than Cousins, can maybe do some things in the Arthur Smith offense to help in that regard, right? I don't think it's that big of a difference, but again, you assume they're going to go after someone who's going to throw the ball better downfield. You don't make a move for a player of Metcalf's caliber and style of play, right? He's a field stretcher. He's speedy. He's great in the red zone when you need to throw to him as well, unless you had a legit quarterback plan. Is that a rookie? Is it Aaron Rodgers? Is it someone else? Well, the options are drying up pretty fast, right? So I think it's Rodgers in play for them and the Giants right now. Well, again, Metcalf is special, but I'm just worried, right? Is Pickens going to be consistent enough? We know Tyler Lockett always was consistent, was a guy that you had to pay attention with the route running. So DK would need Lockett to have a game to kind of help him get open. So Metcalf has been a little bit boom or bust. You can't take him out of the game if you get some big corners on him and all that. So I'm not sure it raises his value quite yet in this move. It might stay the same at best. We just have to see who the quarterback is. And I think I'm most excited for George Pickens because now he doesn't have to be the number one guy. I mean, they had Calvin Austin, some of these other guys that they try to put in there. Like, none of these guys scared away coverage away from Pickens. So I think I'm most excited to see what he can do. But again, someone has to be able to get these guys the ball to make the big plays and to come through the red zone.
Yeah, and it does sound like, I mean, Sam Darnold's taken, Justin Fields goes. Russell Wilson is still out there, so maybe they decide to go back to Russell Wilson, who we know DK Metcalf has had plenty of success with in his earlier career. And if it's Aaron Rodgers, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a terrible decision by the Steelers, but I don't think it's a bad thing when it comes to George Pickens and DK Metcalf's fantasy value. Also, Rodgers is a lot more willing to throw in the middle of the field than Russell Wilson ever was. Like, that was the biggest issue, is that moon balls or nothing else. Rodgers still, I think, has a lot left. Not a lot left in his career, but more left than Russell Wilson does. So I agree with you. I think this DK Metcalf signing is actually, I don't see Pickens' value losing. If anything, I think it gets better. Hopefully more touchdowns available. And it's going to be hard for defenses to stop both DK and Pickens. They do very similar things. It will be interesting for Arthur Smith to have to figure out. But, I like the move by the Steelers to trade for DK Metcalf. Now, I do think this is very bad for Pat Freiermuth, though, because Freiermuth was kind of a necessity last year and still didn't do much with. He got 78 targets, second on the team, 653 yards, 7 touchdowns. He had some viable fantasy weeks in there, but really with no other options, he still could only get 78 targets. I think with DK, and then, Pickens missed some games last year as well. Freiermuth's off my board.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you're right, out of necessity, because they didn't really have a second receiver that they could rely upon really for any long stretch of the season. So they had to throw to him. I mean, he put up the numbers the best he could, but I think he'll go back to doing what he does best, maybe play in line, and now you have 2 receivers who should dominate targets from whoever the quarterback is. And then it'll be a trickle-down effect to the other guys from there, right? They'll be quite spread out, the targets, when they're not going to Metcalf and Pickens. So, again, downfield passing game, very interesting. It's kind of like the Norv Turner, Scott Turner old system, right? Run, pound, throw deep. And they had some of those concepts with Ben Roethlisberger too, right? Play, action, throw off the running game, and maybe that's what they're throwing it back to. And again, I thought this was interesting because it's also the Eagles' blueprint. You have 2 receivers that can make big plays, and then you kind of get the offensive line short up. You have a running game. You have a mobile quarterback. So we'll see. That's what is puzzling to me. I think a mobile quarterback would do a little bit better, but they're down to Rodgers and Cousins. I think that's better from the perspective of, okay, you're not going to get a guy running and taking away yards that way, the way that Fields could have. Now you're going to have to pass it and push it downfield to these guys. So, again, I'm excited. I just wouldn't be too high on Metcalf. I think he's about leveling out, but I think Pickens is the one to get really excited about, to maybe creep into that wide receiver 2 conversation.
Yeah, and the biggest thing with Pickens is, not being able to catch touchdowns. DK Metcalf has been very good in that in his career, so hopefully he can bring that to Pittsburgh. We are going to talk about what the Seahawks are doing now at quarterback, because they trade away Geno Smith and they add Sam Darnold. So is it a big change? I don't know. We're going to get into it right after a quick break. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with TurboTax expert who could do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deductible possible and file every form, every investment, everything, with 100% accuracy. So all you can do is get the most money back, guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. This is only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, we got our answers real quick in free agency about who the Seahawks quarterback is going to be, because they traded away Geno Smith, and you're like, they don't really have a plan. And they just traded away DK Metcalf. They released Tyler Lockett, so it looked like they're looking for a rebuild. But then they signed Sam Darnold to a 3-year, $100 million deal. And do you think they're like the same human being? So I don't really get why they switched them. I mean, you look throughout their career. I mean, Geno Smith has a better completion percentage, slightly better passing yards per game, slightly better passing yards per attempt, slightly lower pass touchdown percentage by 0.2, and a slightly better pass interception percentage by 0.2. I don't really know if there's a difference between Sam Darnold and Geno Smith. So I guess instead of, they got a little compensation for Geno Smith in a trade and they wanted to go Sam Darnold. What are your thoughts of this? Do you think Darnold can do well in the system after leaving Kevin O'Connell? I will say that the Seahawks did hire Clint Kubiak as their new OC, and he does run a very similar system to Kevin O'Connell. So maybe there's hope there.
Yeah, and I think it was all about the system. And you look at Geno Smith, I mean, the big selling point here is he's younger, like Sam Darnold. That's fine, but he's still not young, right? You're not talking about like a 24-year-old quarterback that you're looking at your franchise. I mean, the deal's only for 3 years too, so they're not signing him for long term. They want to see how it plays out, right? So I think the biggest thing was what you just mentioned. They went through a couple coordinators, right? They had Dave Canales, they had Ryan Grubb. It didn't work out. So now they said, okay, we're going to Clint Kubiak. What quarterback does he want? He said, I want somebody from this Kyle Shanahan / Sean McVay / Kevin O'Connell, whatever, the extension of these. And Darnold did spend a year in San Francisco. So there was that. I mean, where Kubiak once was. So there's all those connections, right, in this type of offense. I think they just saw Sam Darnold is executing this offense better. What doesn't make sense to me, Michelle, is how much more they spent on this situation. Like, I thought they were trying to get out of Geno Smith's contract. Then they turn around and they pay another quarterback a lot of money, more money, really, overall, to be their guy. And what do? You get rid of Tyler Lockett. Look, he was old and he's fading. That makes sense. But then you trade DK Metcalf. You leave Jackson Smith-Njigba on an island where he's the only guy, and it really drops off. The depth chart has nobody after JSN. So I don't know what you're trying to accomplish, but all I know is Darnold, again, you have to downgrade Darnold from his kind of surprise QB1 backdoor season with the Vikings, because where are the weapons? What are we going to see here? What's going to happen? Is this going to be a run-heavy team? I have no idea, but I think it's definitely a downgrade for him. But here's the interesting thing. I think it actually might be an upgrade for Geno Smith, where he's going, and he could have more viability, I think, than Sam Darnold is going to have in Seattle playing for Las Vegas.
Yeah, Geno Smith goes to the Raiders. Now he gets to work with Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers. I still think they definitely still need to add another wide receiver for Geno Smith. But it'll be interesting to see the process. He's back with Pete Carroll now, right? So that connection goes. Does this, I mean, the main key here is Brock Bowers, because I don't think we're going to be like dying to draft Geno Smith in drafts, right? In one quarterback draft. Yeah. But Brock Bowers, he was already our tight end 2 overall in our consensus rankings with George Kittle at the top. Now that we know he has an actual quarterback, because we were saying who can the Raiders get a quarterback that would be good? Geno Smith is obviously a massive upgrade to what they had last year. And it's not like Geno's ever like supported a great fantasy tight end, but he hasn't really played with one. So he has targeted tight ends at a fine rate, 11th most among quarterbacks over the last 3 years, percentage wise. So I think this is great for Brock Bowers. It makes me much more comfortable taking him early in drafts.
Yeah, I think Geno is going to execute the offense. And here's the sneaky fact about this. Everyone's looking at the Pete Carroll aspect of this reunion. I would consider the Chip Kelly aspect, because Geno, again, for you college football nerds, you should know that back in West Virginia, essentially they were running a version of the Chip Kelly offense that became famous at Oregon, the spread type system, right? So Geno Smith actually knows what Chip Kelly wants to do and execute the offense. I think it's actually a very natural fit. It was kind of a shrewd move by the Raiders. I actually kind of predicted this to be a sneaky move, because I thought of this Kelly connection where he's going to execute this offense well. I mean, keep in mind, Kelly is going to change the face of what he can do. I mean, you've had a guy like Nick Foles have a big year in a Chip Kelly offense. So you can execute. It's going to have some passing success. They'll make Brock Bowers a centerpiece. We're like, look, he's our go-to guy. We'll work around him. We have Jacoby Myers, who's pretty decent. Now, all you have to think about the Raiders, they might not be stuck at number 6 going after Shedeur Sanders. They can maybe get Ted McMillan and go after somebody to give him that big weapon that he had in DK Metcalf in Seattle. So they have a lot of flexibility here where, look, Geno's older, but I think he can give you better years in this system than Darnold probably can in the previous system in Seattle. So, Geno's been fine. He's been really good in different offenses. I think he's just matured overall as a quarterback. Like, I trust him a little bit more changing teams than I do Darnold. So, again, this is pretty good. Again, Bowers set up nicely here. I think I just like the move overall. I think he's going to have some good QB2 super flex relevance. He's a lot more appealing than Darnold to me at this point.
Yeah, definitely is. And I agree with you with the Brock Bowers stuff. Like, 5 touchdowns last year only, and he was still tight end 2 overall.
Yeah.
So much room to grow if Geno Smith can be better than Aiden O'Connell and Desmond Ridder, right? And he was already so much better with Aiden O'Connell than he was with Desmond Ridder. So that's already a plus. And I do think Geno Smith is much better than Aiden O'Connell. And then with Jacoby Myers, he still put up 1,000 receiving yards last year, only 4 touchdowns. The whole issues were touchdowns in this Raiders offense, but he was still a viable asset in some weeks, and with 129 targets and 15 games played, again with Aiden O'Connell and Desmond Ridder. So give him Geno Smith. We'll see who they add. If they add a better wide receiver or go wide receiver early in the draft, then that can change things. But for now, Jacoby Myers is going to be a really sneaky late round pick, I believe. Now we have a little bit more quarterback news here for now. Justin Fields in New York. So he's signing with the Jets. He's not staying back with the Steelers. Looks like Aaron Rodgers might be headed to Pittsburgh, so they could just be swapping quarterbacks. 2 bad teams wanting to swap quarterbacks. I don't know. But we will discuss Justin Fields, his fantasy outlook next year, and how he impacts the playmakers in New York right after a quick break.
All right, this episode, Locked On Fantasy Football, is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You might be excited for these NFL moves and what could happen in the fall with some of these games. But before then, March Madness is here. It's coming. Selection Sunday is this Sunday. That's right. And FanDuel is getting you and giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets in the end. Will it be UConn a third straight time? We'll see about that. But right now, it's a fun thing to look at. I do a column every year picking the favorites there at Sporting News and how you got it. I had UConn's repeating last year, worked out. So you got to look for the teams this year, underdogs. You always have to look for the sleeper Cinderellas, maybe McNeese State, some team like that making a run. Those are the teams that you can consider on FanDuel. It makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something to bet on. Right now, there's conference tournaments, too, that you can get in on before March Madness starts. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly and no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Again, your number one stop for March Madness. That's FanDuel.com. All right, Michelle, it is time to continue the show and close it here. So we got Sam Darnold and Geno Smith. So this revolving door happens. It's kind of weird, right? We're talking about 2 former Jets quarterbacks. You wonder if at some point the Seahawks are also going to employ Zach Wilson sometime in the future. But we know the former Bears and Steelers quarterback, Justin Fields, is now the new Jets quarterback, replacing Aaron Rodgers. If you've got all that, you got a 2-year, $40 million deal, $30 million guaranteed. So the Jets definitely spend some money on a guy that is still quite unproven here to be their starter. My guess is they're still maybe going to draft a quarterback with Justin Fields. But in the short term, Michelle, what do you think about Justin Fields, and what does this really mean for this new Jets offense run by Tanner Engstrand?
I think this is fine for Fields, right? He has good weapons there in Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall, and we'll see who else they add. And him just landing a starting job, or at least it seems like he is, they're paying him $20 million a year is a big deal. And last year in his 6 starts, he averaged almost 19 fantasy points per game, 18.9, quarterback 8 on the year in points per game and starts. And that was only with throwing 5 touchdowns through 6 starts. He also had 5 rushing touchdowns, but this is the thing. He doesn't have to be a great passer to put up the fantasy points. So as long as he's a starting quarterback in this league, he is going to be a viable and pretty solid fantasy quarterback. I am a little bit worried about Garrett Wilson, though. I know we saw DJ Moore have a a really good fantasy season with Justin Fields, just 2 years removed, but we didn't see that at all with the Steelers. And it's a new offense, and Garrett Wilson has been a disappointment pretty much his entire career, right, in terms of fantasy value. So what are your thoughts with Garrett Wilson with Justin Fields?
Yeah, I think it actually may be good because Justin Fields is a limited quarterback. And when I say that, I mean when he's passing, he's not going to really spread the ball around a lot, right? He's going to trust certain guys, and we know Devontae Adams is now in Los Angeles. That's another move we'll break down went to the Rams. So now Garrett Wilson is back to being the clear number one. There's not picking favorites. They're not Aaron Rodgers picking Al Lazard or somebody he knows, a buddy, overthrowing to Garrett Wilson, right? That's not going to come. Like Justin Fields would be like, if you tell him to throw and Tanner Engstrand comes from the Lions, like if you say throw to this guy, he's your go-to guy, Justin Fields is going to be, yeah, I'll do it. Like, this is my best receiver by far at this point. He's going to pepper him with targets. So what maybe lost a little bit in the quality of the quarterback throwing downfield can be gained by him just targeting him like nothing else, right? There's really nothing you look at. They're still trying to figure out tight end here. Wide receiver, look, all these cronies of Rodgers are not going to be in the mix either. So it's going to be – and it's kind of like that DJ Moore effect. And then the other offshoot of this, you have a running quarterback. Running quarterback is always good for the running back in a different way. It may not check down as much for Breece Hall, but it does help. Someone has to account for Fields on every play it is running, right? That's going to help what Breece Hall can do on the ground as well. So in a weird way, this is going to be a very compressed Jets offense, but sometimes that's not bad if you know what you're going to get from everybody. I think you actually might know what you're going to get, where I don't know exactly what I'm going to get from Darnold. Like, he's going to have to give Jackson Smith-Njigba major targets. So sometimes it's not bad to have that one guy that you know the quarterback is going to throw to.
Yeah, I don't mind this at all for Fields. I don't mind this location for his fantasy value. Garrett Wilson, this doesn't push him up or necessarily push him down. We know he's going to be heavily targeted. It's just he hasn't done a whole lot with his heavy targets lately, and I don't know if Justin Fields will change that. And for Breece Hall, this doesn't push him up for me either. I know, like we say, well, the quarterbacks can be good, but Breece Hall gets so much of his fantasy value from receptions. And they have Braylon Allen there, who looked good as a rookie, as that power back type. So maybe he gets more carries. And then again, like, without the receptions and how many scoring opportunities are they going to have with Justin Fields there too? I don't know. I don't love this for Breece Hall or Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, I just think in general, again, you're going to have to make up it with volume, right? And maybe the Jets pivot to more running. I have hope that if they adopt some line system with Aaron Glenn kind of overseeing it defensively, that maybe they'll try to turn Breece Hall into a poor man's Jahmyr Gibbs, right, and turn Wilson into Amon-Ra St. Brown, where these guys are the centerpiece of the offense and they go out and maybe get a tight end with that early pick. I could see that happening. Then you kind of were trying to recreate that Lions offense in New York, and the only difference is Jared Goff is a much better pocket and downfield passer than Justin Fields. So I don't think Fields is going to lose too much because, again, he just runs so much, Michelle, that he's going to have individually pretty good fantasy value. And he's a draftable guy, which is strange, right? This may be the worst of the reality moves between Darnold, Smith, and Fields, but he's a draftable guy because of the cheat code. He lives up and soaks up that cheat code with his running. I mean, it's almost to a fault that he does it. But in fantasy, the numbers are the numbers, and you can rapidly get numbers by running a lot more than you can as a passing quarterback sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, in 6 starts, 231 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. So he definitely has that upside still. And Justin Fields is definitely going to be a late draft option for this year. And like you said, we're going to feel more confident about him as long as they don't take a quarterback at number 7 or wherever, the number 7 overall. And we know he'll be the starter over Sam Darnold, over Geno Smith, over Aaron Rodgers, wherever he ends up signing. Hopefully not with the Steelers, but it sounds like it. But that is it for today's episode. I want to thank you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We will be back tomorrow. There's a lot more free agency news to get to and hit on, and we will hit on all of it throughout the week. So we'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye, y'all.